Israel has apparently a last phase of combat in store for Gaza, and this reported by the AP. Israel seeks to evacuate Palestinians jammed into a southern Gaza city ahead of an expected invasion. Now, if you look at that photo, this is of the city of Rafah, which is in southern Gaza, right near the border where they would cross into Egypt if they could. Expected invasion. By expected invasion, they mean expected ground invasion. They've already bombed this supposed safe zone quite heavily. So let's read from the AP. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Friday said he has ordered the military to prepare a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah ahead of an expected Israeli invasion of the densely populated southern Gaza city. The announcement came after heavy international criticism, including from the U.S., of Israeli intentions to move ground forces into the city that borders Egypt. Rafah had a pre-war population of roughly 280,000, and according to the United Nations, is now home to some 1.4 million additional people living with relatives in shelters or in sprawling tent camps after fleeing fighting elsewhere in Gaza. So just think about that. A population of 280,000 has now multiplied by about 5 times to 1.4 million. That's how overcrowded this is. Israel says that Rafah is the last remaining Hamas stronghold in Gaza after more than 4 months of war. It's impossible to achieve the goal of the war of eliminating Hamas by leaving 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah, Netanyahu's office said. On the contrary, it is clear that intense activity in Rafah requires that civilians evacuate the areas of combat. Now, I want to give you a sense of how densely populated this city is now. So this is Rafah on October 13th of 2023, before the population fled from the north to the south. And in this slide, this is Rafah now.
Jesus.
So look at this. This is from January 2024.
Wow.
Same satellite shot, October, January. That gives you a sense of the scale of the horror that we are about to witness if this ground invasion goes forward. The operation will be a challenge on many levels. Oh, you think so? It remains unclear where civilians can go. The Israeli offensive has caused widespread destruction, especially in northern Gaza, and hundreds of thousands of people do not have homes to return to. In addition, Egypt has warned that any movement of Palestinians across the border into Egypt would threaten the 4-decade-old peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, which is mostly closed, serves as the main entry point for humanitarian aid. Israel already has begun to strike Rafah from the air. Airstrikes overnight and into Friday hit 2 residential buildings in Rafah, while 2 other sites were bombed in central Gaza, including one that damaged a kindergarten turned shelter for displaced Palestinians. 22 people were killed, according to AP journalists who saw the bodies arriving at hospitals. So you see, this is how densely populated this city is now from the air. Not only are these people crammed into Rafah, not only can they not get through the border to Egypt because Egypt are saying we won't take them, but also they can't go back north. There's nothing to go to back north. They've already been evacuated down here. So where are they supposed to go? This is an impossibility. An impossibility. We're going to take a look at a quick CNN report so you can see this city in motion.
Meanwhile, in Rafah, once deemed a safe zone, UNICEF estimates that there are now more than 600,000 children among the over 1 million people in the area, many taking shelter in these sprawling tent cities. The southern city has, for weeks, come under relentless airstrikes by the Israeli military, who say they are targeting Hamas. But now, a looming ground operation is stoking fears that Rafah could become, as one aid group has described it, a zone of bloodshed. If by some misfortune there's an invasion of Rafah, 2/3 of the population will die, Jabr says. We can't get out of Rafah. We have no other alternative.
I'm just going to pause it for a second there. Of course they can't get out. Look at behind him. Look at the street there.
Look at this.
You can't even walk down the street in Rafah. They're going to evacuate 1.4 million civilians from Rafah. Because don't forget, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, they've already killed 20,000 Hamas soldiers, which means there's only 5,000 left. Now, of course, that 20,000 number is total bullshit. But taking his words at face value, that means you're going to displace 1.4 million people so that you can theoretically kill the remaining 5,000. That in itself is against international law. Forced displacement as a means of collective punishment is a violation of
entire war is collective punishment.
Well, the entire war. But I'm just talking about in this micro example here. Look at the street. You can't even walk down the street there. They're going to evacuate 1 million people from there.
Right.
I mean, it's absurd on its face.
Israel says it is now calling for a mass evacuation of civilians in the southern city ahead of a planned ground offensive. But it is almost impossible to fathom where else these civilians can turn to. But Rafah has not only become a vital lifeline for the displaced, it is also a crucial gateway for humanitarian aid crossing over from Egypt. And many in the international community are now sounding alarm bells over Israel's warning.
And I'm especially alarmed by reports that the Israeli military intends to focus next on Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been squeezed in a desperate search for safety.
The US State Department has warned that it cannot support an Israeli military operation in Rafah without serious planning for civilians there. With US President Joe Biden on Thursday describing Israel's actions in Gaza as, quote, over the top.
Over the top.
But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already dismissed a proposal from Hamas for a prolonged truce, which would see a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and a gradual release of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners.
Look at this. This is the supposed safe zone that these people were told to flee to from the north, number one. Number two, this is pre-invasion Rafah. So in other words, this is just a result of the air campaign.
Right.
Now they're going to do a ground invasion. This is the before picture of Rafah.
Well, and you can see they haven't hit it as hard because it doesn't look like the surface of the moon.
Right. There's still some buildings that are standing.
We did a story on Jimmy's about the IDF running this secret telegraph channel where they would boast about their atrocities, and I showed a couple of the videos. There were other things I didn't use of them showing bombed mosques and celebrating, showing bombed hospitals. That's what they're going to do to this. And they're going to say, it was because of Hamas. The level, I know we're not going to wind up doing it today, but you also sent me a video of soldiers making fun of a
journalist,
Palestinian female journalist.
Heckling her while she's on the air, trying to do the report.
Her, making fun of her, with absolutely no concern about the fact that they're on camera. And if you look at how those soldiers behaved, they're Nazis. They're Nazis. This is what you would expect from Nazis. And you look at how they're acting, what kind of regard do you think they're going to have for civilian life when they go into this territory? These people, these sick bastards.
And somebody asked, how can this be stopped? Well, the United States has apparently told Israel, don't go in with ground forces here. Let's see if they listen. And let's see what happens when they don't.
They're not going to listen.
Right? Don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath. So we'll see what happens.
They know that we will not cut them off.
Right.
So at that point, why would they listen? That's all they care about.
At this point, you could cut them off. This is the last phase. That's why, I've been saying this isn't going to go on forever. This isn't like the war in Ukraine that could go on for a couple of years. There's not going to be any of Gaza left. There already isn't any more of Gaza left besides Rafah, basically. That's why there's 1.4 million people there. City of 280,000. Now there's 1.4 million. And to think of what's about to happen is just horrible. It's unspeakable, but we'll see. I mean, like I said, in this instance, the United States said, don't do it. What happens when they do? what happens when they do. We'll see what that press conference is
Nothing.
like. I'm sure that'll be a hell of a press conference, for Matthew Miller or whoever that fucking asshole is that they send out there with the with the eyeglasses. We'll see what they have to say for this in the aftermath of this, which could be the worst of this war. I mean, it's hard to imagine that the worst could be yet to come, but it could be when you look at the situation there.
Well, this is,
Did you do the math?
Well, it's funny, and this is a comparison a lot of people made from the beginning, how, one of our favorite stories in cinema as Americans, particularly Americans, love the story because of our own origin story of the feisty, under-equipped rebels against the evil empire. And you always have the scene in those movies of the innocent civilians who are about to be wiped out, and then they get saved, right? All right, well, these are those innocent civilians who are about to be blown up by the Death Star or overwhelmed by the evil forces of the evil empire. And we are that empire. We are that empire. And unfortunately, there is no third force to come in there and stop this from happening. It's just a desperate feeling of helplessness. And the Israelis have certainly made clear they're not going to stop for humanitarian reasons.